In this video, I'm going to talk to you about quotation marks and the rules for how and where to use them. The most common place where we will find quotation marks is in direct quotes. A direct quote is when you write down exactly what someone wrote or said, exactly using their words. And the reader knows that you're doing this because you put quotation marks around what the person said or wrote. When I first wrote this grammar book, I used quotes from Donald Trump before he was elected president, and I was tempted to remove them because I, like probably many of us, don't want to remember what it was like to have Donald Trump as president. But I actually think it's important to keep these quotes to remind ourselves that we need to really pay attention to what candidates say on the campaign trail and make sure to make good choices when we're voting. So the first example is, while on the campaign trail, Donald Trump said, "I love the poorly educated." This is exactly what he said. That's why we put it in quotation marks. Now, you also have the option when you're writing to do what I call a split quote. And a split quote is when you take a quote and you cut it in half at its sort of natural breaking point, and you put the information about who said it in that middle part of the quote. So the original quote that I'm using here says, "I will be phenomenal to the women. I mean, I want to help women." But what I've done is I've taken that natural break after "I will be phenomenal to the women," and I'm putting the information about who said the quote in the break. And if you do that, you just have to remember to put quotation marks around the two parts. So this is the first part, and this is the second part. Okay. Now, of course, you could do it the more conventional way. Trump said, comma, and here we have the whole quote, "I will be phenomenal to the women. I mean, I want to help women." Or you can put it at the end, in which case you start with the quote and then you write "said Trump" at the end. No matter what, though, the rule is you put quotation marks around the direct quote. Now, of course, I hope you remember that we don't put quotation marks around indirect quotes. And an indirect quote is when you paraphrase or put in your own words what the author said. So here's the example of a direct quote. In the words of George Washington Carver, quote, "When you do the common things in life in an uncommon way, you will command the attention of the world," end quote. And then if I wanted to say it or express this idea indirectly, in other words, paraphrase it, I might write, "George Washington Carver believed," notice no quotes because I'm not saying exactly what he said, "believed that the world takes notice when your everyday actions are done in an extraordinary fashion." So this is the same idea as the original sentence, but I've put it in my own words, so there are no quotes. By the way, when you introduce a direct quote, you usually use the word "that." So believed that, said that, right? But when you do a direct quote, you never use that. I don't know why. It's just a stupid little rule, but I thought I'd mention it to you. So here's where things get a little bit trickier. You have to decide whether the punctuation you're using belongs inside the quote or outside the quote. When we quote, we always put the period inside the quote. So notice that. In England, I don't know why, but in England, they put the punctuation outside the quote. But anyway, period goes inside. But sometimes we're using punctuation marks to tell the reader how to understand or interpret the sentence. For example, if Cecilia said, "Can you hand me that pencil?" she's asking me a question, and so therefore the question mark applies to the quotation itself. So in this case, you would not put the question mark outside of the quotation mark. But if someone said, "You need to type those notes for me," not as an exclamation, they're just stating it in a direct way, but my feeling is an exclamation point kind of feeling, like I'm really mad, then I would put the quotation mark outside the quotation because that exclamation point really belongs to my feeling about this statement. We'll work on this more in class, but I do want you to try to understand if the punctuation mark belongs to the quote, it goes inside, but if it belongs to how I feel about the quote, it goes on the outside. And the last rule of quotes is that we use quotes for the titles of short things. So when I say short things, I might mean a song title, the title of a short story, the title of an article, and we use italics. This is the slanty writing. That's what we mean when we say italics for titles of long things. So for example, Formation is a song and the album title is Lemonade. So the album title would go in quotation marks, but the song title would go in quotes. Here's another example. The Telltale Heart is a short story. Maybe you've heard of The Telltale Heart. It's very famous. Is a short story by Edgar Allan Poe. So it's a short story, so it goes in quotation marks. But notice that Beloved, which is a novel title, Beloved in italics is a novel by Toni Morrison. So this can be a little bit tricky, but generally use quotes for short stories, song titles, articles, and use italics for books, albums, movies, right? Whereas a short video would go in quotation marks. I hope this is clear. If you have any questions, bring them to class, and I'll see you soon.